what's up guys, it's Foster and we're working on our 22 WRX today. So ever since this car came out, I've been a big fan of the driving dynamics. I love that as a driver, all your inputs translates to how the car reacts, except for there's always been one thing that's bothered me, and that is the shifter feel. I've always felt like the 6-speed transmission in the WRX hasn't quite been up to snuff with the STI. The shifter throws are a little bit too long for my liking and it feels a little bit sloppy. So luckily we've got some mods today that are going to fix this problem. I've got a BilletWorkz short shifter, which should really shorten up the amount of effort it takes to shift gears. And I've also got a Faction Fab shifter stop. So by the time we're done, this transmission will finally be feeling like it always should have. The first thing you have to do is remove this heat shield. There are 6 12mm bolts that are holding it in place. Remove those and then you can pull it out. Above the drive shaft, you're going to see this metal plate. There's 4 nuts that are holding it in place. These are 10mm, so you can loosen those and then remove the plate. All right, the next step is to remove the shifter linkage. In order to do that, pry these 2 metal tabs away from each other and you can pull it down and off, just like that. Now we can disconnect the shift cable. All you have to do is push it towards the driver's side and it should pop free. The last step underneath the car is to remove these 4 10mm nuts that are holding on this plastic trim. Hopping inside the car, the first thing you need to do is pull up on the shift boot and then that will pop it out of place, just like that. The next step is to remove your shift knob. This is pretty simple, just twist it counterclockwise and it should spin right off. Then go ahead and set that out of the way. Now we can remove the shifter trim and all you have to do is just pull up on it and it should pop loose just like that. On these new WRXs, these are actually one piece, including this rubber tray bit. So this is all one piece. You're gonna have to pull this all out. And now we can access the shifter assembly. To remove this back portion of the trim, all you've gotta do is open up the armrest and you should be able to grab onto this trim piece here and pop it loose. Just like that. And then we can set it out of the way. Now we've got way better access to our shifter trim. So there are 4 bolts that are holding your stock shifter assembly in place. They are 12mm, so grab a ratchet and go ahead and remove those. Next, there are 2 Phillips head screws that you have to remove as well. The last step for uninstalling the shifter assembly is to detach the wiring harnesses. There's one on either side, one on the passenger side that has a brown clip, and then one on the driver's side that has a black clip. Once you push in on the sides, it should come free. Once you unplug the wiring harnesses on either side of the stock shifter assembly, you can pull it up and remove it from the car. With the shifter assembly out of the car, we can remove these 2 Phillips head screws that are attaching the wiring harness brackets. And then after that, we can also remove this 12mm bolt that is the neutral lock plunger. So next we're gonna actually remove this bolt. If you flip it around, you'll see that there is a 10mm nut on the other side. So grab a 10mm socket and a 17mm wrench and you can remove the nut. Now go ahead and remove these 2 7mm nuts. All right, I'm gonna flip the shifter assembly back around. We can detach the side shift assembly now. It comes into 2 pieces. It's a little bit greasy, so you might potentially want to wear gloves for this project. Now we can remove these 2 bolts that we took the 7mm nuts off of. Now we're ready to pull this whole center assembly through this larger plastic housing. If you pull it up and out, it should separate into 2 pieces. We've got even more 10mm nuts we need to remove. These 2 ones are holding on this plastic housing. Next, go ahead and remove this rubber O-ring. If you look closely, you'll see there's a little pin. Use a punch and go ahead and get that out of there. With that pin out of place, you can disconnect the reverse lockout and slide the OEM shift lever out of place. Now on to the exciting part of this installation, which is prepping the BilletWorkz short shifter. Use an Allen key, this is a 7/32, to loosen these two Allen bolts, and then you can slide this upper portion of the reverse lockout up and off the shifter. Hopefully you've got a set of snap ring pliers like these. If not, you might want to pick a set up for this next step. But using your snap ring pliers, remove this retaining ring that's holding the spring assembly in place. Next, there is a flat washer and a spring that you can remove. Then use an Allen key to remove this lower Allen bolt. And once you have that removed, you can slide this lower shift lockout all the way up and off. Before we install this BilletWorkz short shifter, use some white lithium grease to grease up all the ball joints and transfer over that white plastic cap from your OEM shifter. In some cases, you might not be able to find that white plastic cap. Like in our case, we had to actually check underneath the car. We're ready to slide the BilletWorkz short shifter into the plastic housing. It should sit just like your factory shifter did. Be aware that there's a small metal nut that might have fallen out during uninstallation, so if that's the case, locate it and slide it back into the plastic housing. Grab your shifter assembly and turn it upside down so everything stays in place, and then you can reinstall that white plastic piece. Make sure that the O-ring is still in place. Then we can reinstall this black plastic cover. It should slip right into place, and then you can put those 10mm nuts back on. Go ahead and drop your shifter into the plastic shifter assembly housing, and then grab those two bolts that we removed earlier and you can slide them back into place. Now we can reinstall this white plastic piece on the pivot, slide it into place, align it on your shifter, and then grab that long bolt we removed earlier and slide that all the way through. Just like before, use a 17mm wrench to hold that bolt in place and a 10mm socket to tighten down that nut. For this next step, line up these two gray pins. You might have to pull them apart because they are spring-loaded. Once you get that lined up, then this whole assembly needs to rotate down until the bolt hole lines up. And that was our 12mm bolt that we need to use. Once you get that bolt started by hand, use a 12mm ratchet and tighten it down until it's snug. All right, hang in there guys. We are on the home stretch of this installation. Now it's time to reinstall the wiring harness brackets using your Phillips head screwdriver. Now we can install the lower portion of the reverse lockout. With that in place, you can put the spring on and you can install the washer. Last but not least, don't forget to reinstall your retaining clip. It should seat right into place on that little groove, so make sure you get it exactly where you want it. Next, pull up on this whole reverse lockout assembly until the holes line up, and then you can reinstall your Allen bolt. Finally, you can reinstall the upper portion of your reverse lockout. As you can see, we went with a galaxy red color on ours, which is kind of cool. With that in place, you can reinstall the Allen bolts. This last step is optional, but since we have the Faction Fab shifter stop, I'm going to go ahead and install that while everything's out of the car. Using a 10mm ratchet, loosen these two bolts. I'm actually going to remove these two bolts entirely since Faction Fab provides new hardware. With those removed, you can install your Faction Fab shifter stop. Just set it loosely in place and then hand start your new Allen bolts. For now, I'm not going to tighten anything down too much at the moment. I'm just going to get it loosely in place where I think it looks right, and then this will have to be adjusted when we install it in the car. All right, so the last step of this Faction Fab shifter stop is to adjust it. At the moment, I loosened it up so that we can get through all the gears. You wanna make sure that there's no interference when you're going from first to second or fifth to sixth, because that's gonna be where the shifter stops come into play. So I'm happy with where the factory one's sitting at the moment. I'm just gonna leave it there. Now I'm gonna do first through second, and it looks like I got too big of a gap, so I'm just gonna slide that over a little bit, and that looks just right. You wanna leave a tiny bit of room for clearance. Once you're happy with where your shifter stops are at, you can go ahead and tighten down these Allen bolts. And now before we finalize it, let's just make sure that we're not having any problems getting it from first to second or from fifth to sixth. And that actually seems pretty good, maybe a little tight on the sixth. So go through this process until you're happy with where your shifter stop's at. All right, we've had that BilletWorkz short shifter installed on our WRX for a couple days now, and after driving around, I can say that the mods that we did in this video really do transform the way that your transmission feels. Obviously, the throws are a lot shorter, but it just feels a lot more crisp and precise to use the transmission, so I'm really happy that we did this upgrade. That Faction Fab shifter stop does take some wobble out of the 1-2 shift, so if you're doing this project, you might as well go ahead and get that as well. And if you're not a fan of the cosmic red look that we got on our BilletWorkz short shifter, they have it available in a matte black, a gloss black, and a gloss red option, so definitely check those out if you're interested. I will say that this project takes a little bit of time, so don't start it late at night on a Sunday if you need your car to be driving on Monday morning. Make sure you give yourself enough time. But hopefully this video was helpful for those of you taking this project on. I'm going to put links in the description down below to the SubiSpeed website if you guys want to pick one of these up for yourself. And with that said, guys, I'll see you next time.